Title: The Cost of Betrayal ***. I heard the whispers before I saw the proof. It started innocuously enough. Small, nagging doubts that I pushed aside. Chris had always been charismatic. The kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. That's what made me fall for him, I suppose. He carried confidence like a second skin. His smile never faltering. His words always perfectly chosen. For 5 years, we'd built a life together. 5 golden, seemingly perfect years. And yet, here I was, watching it all unravel. It began with his late nights at the office. As a marketing director, deadlines and last-minute client meetings weren't unusual. So I didn't bat an eye at first. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? But then there were the changes. The way he'd started guarding his phone like a dragon hoarding treasure. The sudden influx of cologne I didn't recognize. The barely there kisses when he left the house in the mornings. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. I tried to hold on to the image of the man I loved. But the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. The tipping point came one Saturday afternoon, when he told me he had to attend a team-building retreat for the weekend. I remember sitting at the kitchen counter, twisting my mug of coffee in my hands as I studied his face. Something about his tone was too rehearsed, too smooth, as though he'd practiced the story in the mirror. His hazel eyes, which usually sparkled with such ease, seemed to dart nervously. I knew, deep in my gut, that he was lying. "Where's the retreat?" I asked nonchalantly, trying to mask the quiver in my voice. "Lakewood," he said too quickly. "Just a cabin by the lake. Team bonding and all that. You know how it is." I didn't press him further. I simply nodded and smiled, though my insides felt like they were coiling tighter and tighter. That night, after he fell asleep, I did something I'd promised myself I'd never do. I waited until his breathing was deep and steady. Then I eased his phone from his hand. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it. His passcode hadn't changed, though he clearly underestimated my resolve. What I found there shattered me. Her name was Vanessa. The texts between them were damning. No, more than damning. They were vivid, filthy, and filled with the kind of passion he'd stopped showing me months ago. The picture files were even worse. I felt the air leave my lungs, a crushing weight settling on my chest as I scrolled through the evidence of his betrayal. He wasn't just cheating. He was flaunting it, reveling in it. I sat there in the dark, tears streaming silently down my face, my hands clutching the phone like it was a lifeline and a weapon all at once. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there. But something inside me stopped. No, I thought, this wouldn't end with a simple fight or an ultimatum. He wouldn't walk away unscathed. I wasn't sure what my plan was yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Chris's perfect little facade was about to crumble. The next morning, I kissed him goodbye as he left for his retreat. I even smiled at him, though my stomach was churning with rage. The second his car disappeared down the street, I got to work. I spent the day gathering everything I needed. Screenshots of the texts, the pictures, even his credit card statements that showed charges for hotel rooms I'd never been to and expensive dinners I certainly hadn't eaten. Each piece of evidence felt like a knife in my heart. But I pushed through the pain. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice. By Monday morning, I was ready. Chris worked at a prominent firm downtown, a high-stakes marketing agency notorious for its cutthroat environment. He'd always bragged about how indispensable he was, how much his boss respected him. "They'd fall apart without me," he'd say with that smug grin I used to find charming. It was time to test that theory. I arrived at his office building just before lunch, clutching a manila envelope in my hands. My heart raced as I stepped into the sleek, modern lobby, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor echoing in my ears. I'd dressed the part, a tailored blazer, pencil skirt, and heels sharp enough to cut glass. If I was going to do this, I needed to look the part. "Hi, I'm here to see Mr. Anderson," I said to the receptionist. My voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, eyeing me curiously. "No, but I'm sure he'll want to make time for this," I replied, glancing pointedly at the envelope in my hands. She hesitated but eventually picked up the phone and called upstairs. Moments later, I was being ushered into the elevator and up to the executive floor. Mr. Anderson's office was as opulent as I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a breathtaking view of the city, a massive mahogany desk, and plush leather chairs. He stood as I entered, extending a hand in greeting. "You must be Chris's wife," he said warmly. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 50s, with a commanding presence that matched the grandeur of his office. "To what do I owe this surprise visit?" Quote, I smiled tightly and set the envelope on his desk. "I think you'll want to see this," I said simply. He frowned but opened the envelope, his expression darkening with each passing second as he sifted through the contents. By the time he'd finished, his face was a storm cloud. This is unacceptable," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I can't believe." Quote, "Well, believe it," I interrupted, my voice ice cold. "This is who Chris really is. A cheater, a liar, and, as those credit card statements show, someone who's been using company funds for his little rendezvous." Mr. Anderson's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Company funds?" Quote, I nodded. "Those hotel charges? The dinners? Check the dates. They match up with his business trips, don't they?" Quote, he didn't respond, but I could see the gears turning in his head. I stood there, silent and unmoving, as he picked up the phone and barked orders for HR and accounting to meet him immediately. Within minutes, the room was bustling with activity. Papers were being pulled, records scrutinized, and then, like a domino effect, the truth came crashing down. Chris had been embezzling company money to fund his affair. Thousands of dollars, all disguised as legitimate expenses. By the time they called him into the office that afternoon, his fate was already sealed. I stayed to watch the fallout. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not when I'd worked so hard to orchestrate this moment. When Chris walked into the room and saw me sitting there, his face went pale. He glanced around at the stern faces of his colleagues. The pile of evidence spread across the conference table, and I saw the moment he realized he was caught. What's going on?" he stammered, his voice shaking. Mr. Anderson didn't mince words. "You've been using company funds for personal expenses. We have the records, Chris. There's no use denying it." Chris's eyes flicked to me, betrayal and rage flashing across his face. "You did this," he hissed. I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Chris. You did this. I just brought it to light." He tried to argue, to weasel his way out, but it was no use. The evidence was too damning. By the end of the day, he'd been fired, escorted out of the building like a common criminal. I followed him outside, watching as he paced the sidewalk, his hands shaking. "Why?" he demanded, spinning to face me. "Why would you do this to me?" Quote, I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the skyscrapers around us. "You really have to ask? You lied to me, Chris. You betrayed me, and you didn't even have the decency to feel bad about it." I gestured to the building behind us, the one that had just ejected him from its ranks. Quote, "This is what you deserve." For a moment, he just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a strange mix of triumph and heartbreak swirling in my chest. The The weeks that followed were surreal. Chris's reputation was in tatters. His carefully curated image shattered. Word spread quickly about what had happened. And soon, Vanessa dumped him too. I heard through mutual friends that he was struggling to find another job. Apparently, embezzlement doesn't look great on a resume. As for me, I began the slow process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. I'd loved him once, after all, but now, with the truth laid bare, I felt a strange sense of relief. I'd lived in the shadow of his lies for too long, and though the scars of his betrayal would take time to heal, I knew I was free. In the end, Chris got what he deserved, and as I stood on my own 2 feet, stronger and more determined than ever, I realized that I'd gotten something too. Closure. I stood on the sidewalk outside Chris's office building for what felt like hours after he walked away, my arms wrapped around myself against the cold bite of the city's late autumn air. The crispness stung my cheeks, but I welcomed the sensation. It grounded me. Around me, life went on as if nothing earth-shattering had just occurred. Business people hurried past in neatly pressed suits. Taxis honked impatiently in the congested streets, and the clamor of a food truck vendor calling for customers filled the air. But for me, the world had changed irreversibly in the last hour. The triumph I'd expected to feel wasn't as clean or exhilarating as I thought it would be. No, it was muddled, a mixture of vindication, anger, and an aching sadness that settled like a stone in the center of my chest. I'd taken him down, exposed every lie he'd so carefully spun. But I couldn't ignore the quiet, dull throbbing of my heart. I wasn't mourning him. Not exactly. I was mourning the 5 years I'd wasted, the trust I'd given so freely, and the version of myself who had once believed in him so completely. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my coat, pulling me out of my tangled thoughts. For a split second, I thought it might be Chris again, launching some vengeful tirade against me. Instead, it was Lydia, my best friend since college. Heard about the fireworks. Drinks at 6? You need this. I smiled. A real, genuine smile that pushed through the haze of my grief. Lydia had always been my rock, and though I'd deliberately avoided telling her about Chris until I had solid proof, I knew I wouldn't have gotten through the last few days without her daily check-ins. I texted back quickly. I'll be there. Later that evening, I stepped into the cozy, dimly lit corner bar Lydia and I had frequented for years. The crackle of conversation blended with soft jazz humming from the speakers, and the familiar scent of whiskey and polished wood made me feel instantly at ease. Lydia was already waiting at our usual booth, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses sitting between us. "Look at you," she exclaimed as I slid into the seat across from her. She gestured to my outfit, the tailored blazer and pencil skirt I'd worn to Chris's office. Corporate assassin chic. I approve. Quote. I laughed softly, shaking my head as she poured me a glass of wine. I don't feel that chic, I admitted. I don't know. Lied. I thought I'd feel invincible after today. But, quote, but you feel like you've been hit by a truck, she finished, her tone gentler now. I nodded, sipping my wine. Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad I did it. He deserved every bit of what happened today. But, my voice faltered, and I took a deep breath before continuing. It's just hard to look back and think of all the time I wasted on him. All the things I ignored because I wanted to believe in him so badly. Lydia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're human, Emma. You loved him. And you trusted him. That's not a failure on your part. It's one on his. He's the one who ruined it, not you. You did everything right. Her words soothed something raw in me, though they didn't completely erase the ache. I know you're right, I said softly. But it still hurts. We sat in silence for a moment. the weight of the conversation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Then Lydia's expression shifted, her sharp green eyes gleaming with mischief. "You know," she said, leaning in conspiratorially, "I heard Vanessa dumped his sorry ass today after she found out about the embezzlement. Looks like someone's having a rough day." A startled laugh burst out of me before I could stop it. "Did you seriously look into this?" Quote, "Of course I did. You think I'm going to sit back and not Google stalk the guy after everything he did to you? Please." She leaned back in her seat, smirking. "Word travels fast in his industry. By the way, people are already whispering about how he cooked the books. He'll be lucky to get hired as a barista after this." The satisfying crunch of that reality settled over me like a bomb. Chris, the man who'd bragged for years about his untouchable reputation, who'd built his career, and, apparently, his affair, by stepping on the trust of others, was going to learn the hard way that every action has consequences. I wasn't proud of taking him down, but I wasn't sorry either. Over the following weeks, I began to find myself again. Life post-Chris wasn't easy, but the act of rebuilding gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I went back to my hobbies: painting, running, volunteering at the local animal shelter. Slowly but surely, I filled my days with people and activities that brought me joy, rather than the stress of trying to keep a crumbling relationship afloat. I also found closure in an unexpected place. One afternoon, while clearing out the last of Chris's belongings from my apartment, I stumbled across an old photo album tucked under a pile of dusty books. It was from the early days of our relationship, the days when things had been good, even perfect. There we were, smiling on a hiking trip, building sandcastles at the beach, decorating our first Christmas tree together. For a moment, I let myself feel the pang of nostalgia, the bittersweet pull of those memories. But as I flipped through the pages, something occurred to me. Those moments of happiness hadn't been a lie. They were real. Chris hadn't been perfect, but for a time, he had made me happy. And while that didn't excuse what he'd done, it reminded me that I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away with lessons learned and a stronger sense of who I was. I boxed up the album along with the rest of his things and left it by the curb for him to pick up. He never came to get it, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. By then, Chris was just a ghost of my past, someone I'd once known but no longer recognized. One chilly morning in December, as I walked to my favorite coffee shop, I bumped into an old colleague of Chris's, a woman named Laura. She'd attended a few of the parties we'd thrown back when I was still playing the role of the doting girlfriend. I recognized her instantly, with her sleek bob haircut and impeccably tailored trench coat. "Emma?" she asked, her voice tinged with surprise. "Laura," I greeted her, forcing a polite smile. "Wow, it's been a while," she said, tilting her head. "I heard about everything that happened with Chris. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you had to go through that." Her sympathy felt genuine, but I caught the curiosity in her expression too. Gossip about Chris's downfall had clearly made its rounds in her circle, and I could tell she wanted to dig for details. "Thank you," I said simply, brushing past the invitation to elaborate. Laura hesitated, then added, "You know, it's crazy. He really had everyone fooled. But I guess people like that always do." I nodded, watching her expression shift as she studied me. Her words echoed in my mind long after we parted ways. People like that always do. She was right, of course. Chris was a master manipulator, someone who thrived on appearances and deception. But he wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouchable. I had shown him that. As the weeks turned into months, the sting of betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I didn't need Chris to be okay. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. What I needed, and what I'd finally found, was myself. Somewhere out there, Chris was living with the consequences of his choices. And that was enough for me. I wouldn't waste another ounce of energy on him. I had a life to rebuild, dreams to chase, and a future to embrace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. When I walked past that same office building months later, the memories didn't stab like they once had. Instead, I smiled faintly, tipped my chin up toward the sky, and kept walking.